So here is the model that we're going to build in this session. It's an arts and crafts cocktail table, 4 legs. It's got an apron that goes all the way around, and it's got these arch stretchers, and then some rails on top of those with a grid work built into the rails. This has no joinery in it, and in the follow-up session we will add joinery to this. But this is our goal in this session. So we're going to start by opening up a new document, and the first thing I'm going to do is define some parameters of the base of this table. So I'm going to use my Shift P shortcut key, go to the parameters dialog box, click on plus, and then type in base width. And that's initially going to be 33 inches. Base depth is going to be 21 inches. And base height is going to be 19 inches. So this is going to define the wireframe that we're going to build. So now I'm going to make a component. So I'll create component. I'm going to call this base wireframe. And that component is activated, so I can create a sketch. And now I want to create a sketch on the ground plane. And I'm going to use a centered rectangle. And I'm going to start it right from the origin, and then move it out, and then use my base width and base depth parameters that we just defined for the width of this rectangle and base depth for the other dimension. So I'll scroll back in here, and we see that we've got our dimensions on here, and we've got a closed profile. So I'm going to finish the sketch and then zoom out a bit, go to extrude, and I'm going to extrude this in an upward direction, and then put in my base height parameter for the overall height. So we're just making a block, and remember we want to make this a wireframe, so we're going to use A for appearance, type in air, search on that appearance, scroll down here, there it is. So I'm going to drag this onto the base wireframe component and close. So we still have a solid block here, but we've put air as the appearance, and we can see right through it. So that's exactly what we want. Next, we're going to create the first leg in the table, and we're going to use the wireframe to properly position it. So I'm going to go up to my new component button and click on that, and then type in leg. And now I'm going to create a sketch. And I want to create a sketch on this bottom inside plane of the wireframe. But since the wireframe is essentially a solid, it's not letting me select it. So I'm going to hold my left mouse button down to use this drill through technique. And then as I toggle through these various faces, you can see that the grid appears on the 2 faces that I'm being presented with here. So I'm going to pick this second one, which is the face that I want. And now if I verify what I'm looking at with the view cube, I can see that I'm looking straight down from the top. So I'm going to go to my 2-point rectangle. But first I think I need to define one parameter, which is the leg width. So I press my shortcut key to get in the parameter list, and I'll type in leg width, and that's initially going to be 1 3/4 inch. Okay, so I'm still in my sketch here. I'm going to click on 2-point rectangle, click in the corner, and then type in leg, select width, tab, and leg width again, and enter. So now we have a 1 3/4 square in the corner of the wireframe. So we can finish the sketch, and then if we hover over this profile, you can see that again the wireframe is blocking this from happening. So the easiest thing to do here is hide the wireframe, click on this, go to extrude, start pulling the leg up, and then turn the base frame back on, because we're actually going to bring this up to the top here, and we want to see how far to go. But we know we have a parameter here, so we can just type in our base height, and you see that we're going in a negative direction. So I'm going to type in negative base height and press enter, and we can see that we are aligned to the top of the wireframe. So I'm going to press OK, and we have completed the first leg. Next, I'm going to use the mirror command to create a left side pair of legs, and then select both of those legs and mirror them over to the right side. So we have our wireframe here, but we also have an origin that's right in the middle of our wireframe that contains two planes that we can mirror about. So at this point, I don't think we need our wireframe to be showing. It's going to kind of get in the way. But we'll bring it back to confirm that the legs show up in the right position. So let's go up to our top level component, select mirror, and oops, I got into rectangular pattern. Let me try that again. Select mirror. So components is already selected here. I'm going to select what I want to mirror, which is the leg, and then select a mirror plane, which is this plane right here, and then click on OK. So if I bring my wireframe back, you'll see that those legs are properly positioned. So I'm going to hide the wireframe again, and I'm still in the top level component. So I'm going to go to my mirror command, and this time I'm going to select two objects. So I just have to click. I don't have to use shift click because I'm in one of the Fusion feature dialog boxes. And now I have to click on mirror plane in the dialog and then click on the plane. Two more legs are created. I'll click OK, and I'll turn my base wireframe on to confirm that they're in the right spot. So next I'm going to create the 4 apron pieces, basically that attach the legs together and will form a base for the top to sit on. So I'm going to start by making 2 stretchers that go across the short dimension, and then 2 other pieces that go across the long dimension. So first thing, I'm going to hide this origin. Now an easy way to find that in the browser is to right click on it, but remember I have this wireframe in the way, so I'll just hide that. I thought I hit it. There we go. I'm just going to hide that. So now if I right click on this origin and find in browser, you can see that this wireframe opened up, and I'm not sure why that did. The origin's right here anyway. So I hid the origin. Now let's use the view cube to get a front view. And I've pretty much been working left to right here. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to make this left stretcher first. So I will start by making a new component, but first looking to see if I'm on the top level component. So I am. So new component, stretcher, ST stretcher. There we go. S-T-R-E-T. Hard word to spell. Stretcher. There we go. Okay, so I've got my component, and now I actually need a couple of parameters. So I'm going to press my Shift P, get my parameters dialog box on the screen here, change its size a little bit. And you can also use this little tool here to change the column width. Okay, so we need 2. I'm going to make an apron width and an apron depth. So these 4 pieces going around the top of the legs is going to be the same width and depth. So I'm going to type in apron width, and that's going to be an initial size of 2.5. And okay, and then an apron depth of 1 inch. Okay, so I've got my parameters set up, and I'm going to make a sketch on the inside of the front leg. I'll do the inside of the front left leg. So I'll come around here. I'm actually going to pre-select this time just to make sure that I've got the right sketch plane. And now when I create sketch, it just immediately goes there. Okay, so we do have a leg in front here, but remember we've selected a sketch plane. So we will, even though it looks like we're drawing on top of this leg, the back leg, we will be drawing on this plane here. And the reason that I want to look straight at it is so that Fusion will automatically do the projections for us. So I want this piece to be flush to the outside of the table. So I'm going to get my 2-point rectangle and make sure I snap there. And then it's just a matter of putting our 2 dimensions in. So let's see, this one, if I tab there, is the height of that piece. So that is defined as the width of the piece. So apron width. And again, I use the term width here because, you know, if I'm ripping this on a table saw, that would be the width of the board. Okay, and the thickness, you know, would be what I plane out of a planer, and that's going to be my depth. So apron depth. Okay, so if I press enter on that, I now have a fully defined sketch. It's coincident to this top outside corner, and it's of a particular width and a particular height. So if I orbit a little bit away from there, you can see where we are. And now it's just a matter of finishing the sketch and extruding it to this other side. So when I extrude, I want to use, let's see, I can either extrude to a point here. You know, as I'm extruding, I can click on this surface and essentially set the dimension that way. But I believe that's not going to be parametric. In other words, when this when the base width or depth changes, this length is going to change, and I don't think this is going to get the parametric stuff done. It'd be much more safe to actually put a formula in here to define this. So even though I didn't put specifically a parameter in here, I know that I have a base depth, and that is basically from the outside of this leg to the outside of that leg, so it's too far. So I'm going to subtract -2 times the leg width. So I'm subtracting the width of this leg and the width of that leg. And that should give us, here's the full formula over here in the dialog box. That should give us the proper length. And now that will be parametric, because as the base depth changes, or if the leg width changes, this piece will resize appropriately. Okay, so that's all we really need to do to get that stretcher defined. Let's go to home here in our view cube. And so we can see I'm working on the left side now. If I go up to the origin, remember we centered everything in this drawing initially. So we have a plane right here that we can mirror against, which is very convenient. And again, the reason we want to mirror here is that, you know, this could have tenons that are off center perhaps, and this piece truly could need to be mirror imaged. In this case, I don't think technically it does. We could manually copy this over, but I find it much easier to mirror anyway, because then I don't have to move it to a specific location. Okay, so I'm going to make sure the top level component is selected, and I'm going to go to my mirror command, and components is already selected in the dialog box. So I need to select my left stretcher here, and then select the mirror plane, and it mirrors, and then I press OK, and we're all set. So we now have a stretcher, And at this point, I think I'm going to do a little bit of renaming. Let's see. Let's make sure we're looking at this. Okay, so this is the front. I'm going to rename the legs and the stretchers. So I'm going to click on the leg, wait a second, and then click again. And I'll just say leg dash LF for left front. Click on this leg and I can see where it is, so that's convenient for my renaming. So there is no right-click rename, believe it or not. I think that's an oversight by the Autodesk people, but they didn't ask me. So left, okay, so this is our left rear. So leg LR, leg dash LR. Okay, and then moving through these one at a time, here's our right front. So I keep right-clicking to want to do a rename. Leg, right front, RF, and then the final one, which will be our right back. Leg dash RB. Okay, so we're going to do the same with our stretchers. So this is going to be stretcher dash L. And this is going to be stretcher dash R. Okay, very good. So now we need to do a similar thing, defining what I'm calling the aprons, which are the, or I guess they could be called rails too, but the horizontal members between these two legs. All right. So to make the aprons, I'm going to follow a very similar process. I'm going to begin on this outside top of the left leg, and I'm going to define a sketch plane first and then snap to that point, and then define the length based on a formula of our base width. Okay, so again, I'm going to use this pre-select. That's where I want my sketch plane to be. Then create the sketch. I can hide this leg. Now I know that this is the right front leg because we renamed. So I can hide that, and it doesn't look like I hit it, but I actually did. So we're working over here. We want to be looking straight at it for projection, automatic projection purposes. Okay, so I want to be able to snap to that point. I'll get my 2-point rectangle and I'll snap there. So I've got a coincidence there. And then I want to use the same parameters I used. This is going to be our apron, oops, APRON. Okay, this is going to be our apron depth. And then down here, oops, I clicked. So I'm going to, now that I've finalized this, I'm going to hit D for dimension and pull off of this left side and then type in apron width. Okay, so now we have a fully defined sketch. I'll clean up the dimensions a little bit, and you can see where the profile is, and I can select that. So that's all I need for an extrude. So I'm going to finish the sketch, and then I'll go into my extrude tool, and I can show that leg again that's hidden. And I can pull this back. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that this is becoming part of the leg. The reason for that is the extrude defaulted to join on this operation. So I'm going to change that. I actually want a new body. You know, I actually forgot to do something. I forgot to make the component, and I think that's why it defaulted to join here. So a little bit after the fact here, and you probably should make the component first, but I'm going to show you how to recover from this stupid error. I'm going to make a new component here. So now it is a separate body, and it looks like it's going to go to the top level to make that component, which is nice. So we're going to have to rename it afterwards, but that's okay. All right, so now we want to establish this distance up to the inside of this leg. So we're going to start with our base width, which is too big. You can see the extrusion went too far. And I'm going to subtract 2 times the leg width. Oops, I just typed in keg instead of leg. Okay, there's our leg width. All right, so that formula looks like it worked. And let's see where the new component gets created. Here it is, it's in the right spot, so that's great. So I'm just going to click, wait, click a second time, and I'm going to call this an apron. Okay, so that is our front apron, and we'll use the almost identical technique to mirror to the other side that we just did with the stretchers. So make sure our top level component is selected because we are going to be creating a component through this mirror operation. I'll click on mirror, I'll click on the component that I want to mirror, and then click here in the dialog box to select mirror plane, and then use the origin plane, which is right in the middle of our drawing. And oops, I didn't select that for some reason. Okay, so there it is in preview, and it looks good. It's flush to the outside, so I can click on OK. And now I can hide the origin, and we've got two aprons. So we'll do the similar renaming thing. I'm going to click on this, click a second time, and do apron-F for front, and 2 clicks on this, apron-R for rear. Okay. All right, so next up I'm going to make a couple of arched pieces. I'm going to call this an arch, but you might call it a lower stretcher. Might be a better term for it, but I'm just going to use arch. So create a new component and call it arch. Enter. Oops, so it looks like it got stuck underneath my apron. I did not have this top level component selected. So right now I'm going to just click and drag and deposit that in the top level, and that moves it to the proper position in the browser. Okay, so I want to work on the left side first. So I look up in my view cube to make sure I'm there. My arch is the current active component. And this time I'm going to do my sketch across the two legs. So I will create a sketch and use the outside of this leg to indicate my sketch plane. Now this piece is going to be up in space somewhere, and there's nothing to snap to here. So we're actually going to have a parameter that defines how far off the ground does the bottom of this arch start. So let me go into my parameters, and I might as well do all the arch parameters at once. So arch width is going to initially be set to 3 3/4. That's the width of our arch board. And then arch depth is going to be the thickness of that board, so I'll set that to 1 inch. And then arch offset is what I was initially talking about. How far off the ground is the bottom of this arch piece going to be? So arch offset, and that's initially going to be 2 inches. And then our final parameter is going to define where the 3-point arc is, that's the curvature in our arch. So I'm going to call that arch width, the width of this board, at arc. A little confusing, but, and that's going to be, let's see, initially 2 inches. Okay, so those are the 4 parameters I need to draw this piece. So I'm going to OK out. Now I'm going to make a rectangle, and let's see, I'm going to purposely draw this rectangle away from everything else. I'll dimension it, and then we're going to use a constraint to move it to this line. Okay, so R for rect, click, and the top dimension is going to be between the two legs. So we've done that before, so that's our base depth minus 2 times the leg width. Oops, 2 times the leg width. Okay, and you know you have a problem if that's red, by the way. So now that that's all black, it's a valid formula, and I can press enter. Okay, so the other dimension here, which I'll tab to, is going to be our arch, what did I call it? Arch, this is the arch width. Okay. And that was initially 3 3/4. So now we've got a rectangle in space here, and we, obviously want it up here, but we're going to use our constraints to get there. So let me clean up a little bit. And now I want to set a coincident constraint, or actually a collinear constraint. In other words, this line is going to share this line. So this is the collinear constraint. So I'm going to click on the inside of this leg first, so that won't move. And then click on this, which will move. And now you can see that it moved to align itself. And I can't do anything with this rectangle except move it up and down. Okay, so I want it somewhere around here, but I don't know the exact dimension I want. But that's in our parameters. So I'm going to hit D for dimension. I'm going to start at this point and then go up to this line. And now I've got the dimension going in the direction that I want it. And this is our arch offset coming out of our parameters list. So that defines that this arch piece is 2 inches off the ground. So now we've got a fully defined sketch. But remember that this is, going back to the model here, this is an arch piece on the bottom. So that's what we want to generate here in this sketch. So we need a 3-point arc on the bottom, but we need to know how high up we're going to go. And that is defined by the parameter that we set arch width at arc. So what I mean by that is, what's the width of this piece after the arc gets cut out of it, right at the center point. So to set this all up, I'm going to get a line. I'm going to go over to construction geometry, and I'm going to snap to the midpoint here and click, and then just come straight down, let go of the mouse, and then type in our arch, and then select this out of the list, arch width at arc. Okay, and then enter. So that's going to define where our 3-point arc goes up to. That's going to be our third point in a 3-point arc. This being the first point and this being the second. Okay, so I go up to create. I select arc, 3-point arc. Point number 1, I'm snapping to that corner. Point number 2, snap to that corner. And then point number 3, snap to the point that we just defined. Now, the only problem is I am still in construction geometry. I forgot to turn that off. So I'll hit escape to get out of the arc tool, click on the line and press X, which will toggle between regular geometry and construction geometry. Now, we now have 2 profiles, and we could simply extrude this one. What I like to do is change this bottom line to construction geometry by clicking on it and press X. And now when I hover over this area, we don't get a profile. So we can't screw up in the extrusion of this piece. So that is a nice defined sketch. All of our extrusion parts are fully defined. This is not fully defined, and I guess technically you'd probably have to put a length on this to fully define it, but I don't think that's worth it. So I'm going to finish the sketch. And we're at the outside of our table, so we want to extrude inward. So if I press E for extrude, click on the profile, you'll see the arrows going out back towards me. So I know I need to go in a negative direction away from the arrow. So this is going to be negative, and then arch depth is going to be the thickness of that piece, and press enter. So that's it. That's our fancy arch. Now, to make the other side very similar to what we just did, turn on the origin. This is going to be our mirror plane right here. And I'm going to go up to my mirror command, but first I'll select top level component, mirror command, The type of mirroring is components. Object that I want to mirror is this arch. Mirror plane is this one. And you see the preview and it looks fine, so then click on OK. So next, let's look at the finished drawing here. I'm going to create what I'm calling rails, these 3 pieces that sit on top of the arches. Okay, so back in our drawing here, I think the way I'm going to do this is use the sketch plane on top of an arch and also use the origin here as the center point for one of the center rectangles. So if I go to create sketch, click on the top here, I'm in good position here, and all I have to do is go to my center rectangle, click in the center origin, and then come out. But I just realized I haven't defined any parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and make the rectangle and then make the parameters and come back in and attach those to the rectangle. Another thing I'm going to do here is hide the 2 stretchers so that we are now seeing the full rectangle, and what's below it are the arches. So this is a more representative view of what we're trying to do. So I'm going to press Shift P and I'm going to create a few rail parameters. So I'm going to do a rail width of 2 inches. So that's essentially going to be the height of these rails as they sit on the arch pieces. I will create a rail depth, which is the thickness of the rails, and that's initially going to be 1 inch. Rail overhang is what I'm defining as the amount on each side. I'm just going to do rail OH, that the rail overhangs the arch piece. So that's initially going to be 3/4 of an inch overhang on each side. And the last one is going to be number of rails. So I'm going to type in num rails. Now this is going to be 3 for rails, but I specifically don't want inches here. I want no units. So this would fail if we used inches, because we're going to put this in a rectangular pattern that just wants a unit. It doesn't specifically want a unit, it just wants a value. Okay, so there are 4 num rail. I'm actually going to rename that to num rails. Those are our 4 new parameters. So I'm going to click on OK. All right, so now we're going to but we're going to dimension this sketch. Okay, so I press D for my dimension tool, and this is going to be our rail depth. And now you see it changed the length of this, but we're going to reset that with this parameter. I'm sorry, this length. So this is going to be our base width plus 2 times the rail overhang. And I'll press enter, and that looks right. So it's overhanging by 3/4 of an inch on each side, and the depth of it is 1 inch. So I think that's everything we need. It is coincident to the very center of our drawing, so it's positioned properly. So all I need to do here is finish the sketch and then extrude it upward by whatever that width is. So let's see which way our arrow goes when we press E. So it's going in the direction we want to go. Now I again forgot to make a component. So conveniently I can use this new component field, and then we'll have to rename the component. Okay, so I'm going to go a distance upward of rail width, and then press enter. Okay, so first off I want to rename this component. So I'll click, second click, and call this rail. Okay. Now, another thing that I kind of overlooked here is that the last time I did that, we made a sketch which didn't get inside the arch. And now we just made another sketch that didn't get inside the rail. So here are those two sketches. So I'm going to try to click on this sketch and drag it and put it in the rail. And that gave me a warning. So it didn't like that. And let's see if we can do it on the first one. So the first one was when we made the arch. Can I tell you what, you know what? Maybe if I open rail up, and well, I don't think it's going to matter. There's not a sketch folder here. Let me give it one more try. I'm going to drag this into rail, and it did not work. Okay, so that's unfortunate. If I was given a chance to do this again, I would make the component first, and then I can get the sketch inside of it. This is kind of messy because I've got two sketches here that are just kind of directly under the tree structure of the top level component, and they don't belong there. They belong in the components, but I screwed up in not pre-making the component. Okay, so good lesson to learn. All right, so now I'm going to use the mirror command to mirror my rail. No, I'm actually going to use a rectangular pattern command because I want to make one on each side of this. So I'll go up to rectangular pattern, and we are in the top level component, so that's good. We want to pattern components. We want to select the object, which is this middle rail, or the only rail we have right now. The direction we want to go in, I can click on any line to get that. So first I enable direction in the dialog, click on the line, okay. The extent, the distance type, I think we want spacing here. And we're going to space this out by the size of these blocks that we're going to put in between them. I'll show you what I mean. There are little blocks here, kind of decorative blocks, and I should make a parameter for these blocks. So, do I need to do that yet? I guess I can use, if these blocks are going to be the same dimension here as these rails, I think we're safe without a parameter. So, going back to the working drawing, I got taken out of my rectangular pattern. So I'm going to go back in there, components, select the object, here it is here, select the direction, I want to go in that direction, clicking on this line. The spacing is fine. The quantity now, we're going to use the num rails out of our parameters. So if we type in 5 rails, we'd get 5 in that parameter list. The distance, so this is going to be the spacing distance. Let's see if we type in our rail depth, which is the thickness of our rail. You can see we got 3, but they're like right up against each other. So we really want rail depth times 2. Now, see how they're both off on one side? We want it centered around this original. So if we go to symmetric here, that's what we get. So we've created 3 rails, the initial one and 2 more, and we've gone on each side of the initial. So I think we're all set here. So we'll click on OK, and now we got 2 more rails which are identical copies to the first one created here. So that's great. And next we will create our blocks. So again, I'll show you this grid of blocks here. All right, and we're going to define 2 parameters. We're going to define num grid blocks, or number of grid blocks, which in this case is 3. I'm going to create 3 here, and then I'm going to mirror it across. And then I'm also going to create a grid width, which is going to be this dimension right here. So it's really probably better to be grid height, because that's the length, or grid length. It's the length of the board. All right, so we'll work on that. Naming. All right, so let's do the naming first. So Shift P to get in there, and I'm going to call this grid length, which I will set to, actually, if we want to relate this to something else, we could relate it to our rail depth. So then if we change the depth of our rail, the grid length is going to automatically go along with that. So I'll click enter or OK on that, and then the second grid parameter is going to be number of grid blocks. And for number of grid blocks, I'm going to do 3, and I'm going to make sure I get rid of my units. So 3 with no units. Okay. All right. So we're going to make 1 grid block and then reproduce with a rectangular pattern 2 more, and then we'll mirror it across. Okay. So I think the best thing to do here is to get a sketch on this surface here. So I'm going to pre-select, and this time I'm going to do it right. I'm actually going to make a component, and I'm going to do a nested component here. So I'm going to call the first level blocks. So that's going to be an outer component, and inside that component I'm going to make another one, which is block singular. Okay, so that's nested down inside the blocks. So we will have an array of blocks here, individual blocks, but they will be inside this block component. So we'll be able to turn those all off at once, and we won't be, making too much of an addition to our browser as well. Okay, so again, I'm going to pre-select, well, no, I'm going to go up to the top level, and actually we've got our component here, which is block. So really what I want to do is I want to activate that. And now I will pre-select before the sketch and create the sketch. And so here's our middle. So I want to create a rectangle, and I'll just do it out here in space. And the dimensions for this rectangle are going to be the spacing between these rails. And I think we use the rail depth as our spacing. Oops, did I get that? Rail depth. I've got to click on that, and then tab, and rail depth for this as well. Okay. So that's our little block, and let's see if I just kind of temporarily move this, you see that it's going to fit there. I want to define this block right here. Okay. So I'm going to use a constraint to get that in the proper position. So one possible constraint here is midpoint. I want to align the midpoint of this line on the square with the midpoint of this line, and that should take us right to the middle. So I'm going to click on the one that I want to keep, the one that I don't want to move. In this case, I think you're safe doing it in either direction because this 3D geometry that's getting projected is not going to move on you, but still, it's a good habit to be in. So we're in our sketch. I'm going to go to midpoint constraint. I'm going to click on this line. So the midpoint of this line and the midpoint of this line are going to coincide. So the rectangle moved there, and it's in the proper position. It's in the center of the rails. So at this point, we're going to make our first grid block by extruding down, and then we can use a rectangular pattern. So E for extrude. Even if you're in the sketch, it'll take you automatically out of the sketch. And now our length here is going to be our block. Did we do something here? Let's check our parameters here. So I'm going to do a Shift P. I don't remember what I put in. I put grid length. Okay, it's the same as the rail depth. Okay, so when I extrude, press E for extrude, I'm going to go in a negative direction, and I'm going to type a negative grid length, or I could have done the rail height. That's actually not the dimension I wanted. I wanted it to go to the bottom here. So I'm going to just type in, let's see, this is our rail width is what I want. Okay, so that's taking me down. So this little grid block is flush with the bottom and the top of the rail. That's what I wanted. Okay, so I'm going to click on OK. So I do have a parameter in there that can be removed. Okay, so I want two more, one on each side of this. So I can use my rectangular pattern. I'm inside this, I want to be inside this blocks. So I'm going to activate that so that when we get more blocks here reproduced, we'll be on the same level as this first block. Okay, so rectangular pattern, components. It says one selected, so I pre-selected that, so that's fine. If you're not sure, you can always click on this X and then come over and select it. The direction that we want to go in is any of these lines here, any of these rail lines. The spacing is going to be the same as the spacing between the rails. So, and that, I believe, was 2 times our rail depth. What did I do wrong there? 2. Oh, I'm in the quantity field. Okay, so the quantity is our num grid block. Should be plural, but num grid block I think was initially set to 3. And then our direction, we want symmetric. So we want 1 on each side of the original. And our distance for spacing, remember this is center to center. So if I just do the, what was it, rail depth, if I just do that, if I could type, you'll see that the blocks have no spacing. They're just butted up against each other. So if I do 2 times that, I get an space equal to the size of the block. And we've got 3 of them, so I'll click OK. And now we can simply use our mirror command. Another thing I could have done here is done a rectangular array. And let me do that. I think that's makes a little bit more sense. So I'm going to right click, edit this rectangular array feature, and now there's a second section here. It's not doing anything because the distance is set to 0. So I want a quantity of 2. I want 2 rows of these blocks, and the distance is going to be the same as this distance here. So I'm going to select it, do a Control C, select this and do a Control V, and you can see in the preview we've got another set of blocks there. And this is a single direction because we just wanted to go from that original direction. So we've basically got a 2-dimensional array of rectangular pattern going here. So if I OK out of that, it looks like we got what we want. So next we're going to draw a top for the table. But first I just want to show you this embedded 2-level structure of components. So if I scroll our browser stuff down, you'll see that we got from our rectangular pattern 6 copies of this first block component. But they're all underneath blocks. So if I just change the visibility of blocks, I'm hiding all of them or showing all of them. So that's nice. It doesn't clog up our browser as much, and they're all identical components, so there's no reason really not to put those there. Okay, now onto our top. I'm going to activate our top level component. I'm going to make a new component, call it top, and we're going to make this sketch on the top of one of the legs. So I will click on the top of a leg to pre-select our plane and then go into our sketch. So now we've got corners to snap to. And we probably need some parameters defined too. So let's define our parameters first, which we can do inside a sketch. So Shift P, and I'm going to make a top depth, essentially the thickness of our top, which is going to be 1 inch. Our top length overhang. So basically the top going beyond the 4 legs in length, we're going to have an overhang of 3.5 inches. Our top width overhang will be 2 inches. And then this top is going to have a breadboard on each end. So let's do a breadboard width. We may not do anything with the breadboard on this initial part 1 video, but certainly in part 2 we'll get to that. So we're going to have a 3-inch breadboard. Okay. So now it's pretty simple. We're looking straight down on the table base. I get my 2-point rectangle and I snap upper left to lower right on these legs. And I've got a fully defined sketch that is coincident here and coincident there. I'm going to hit escape to get out of my rectangle tool, double click on the rectangle and hit X and make this into construction geometry, because I'm going to do an offset from here to get, you know what, I don't even have to do an offset. I'm going to do a larger rectangle and then define it back to these edges. Well, you know what, I'm actually going to undo that. I don't need this rectangle at all. I'm going to make a center rectangle, put it right in the center of the table, and then I can define the width and height here as, you know, my base width and base depth plus my overhang. So if I type in base, I've got a base width, and then go over to the other one, type in base depth. Okay, so that's the same rectangle as I just drew. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to those. My base depth is going to get my top, it's going to get one of those 2 overhangs added to it. Actually, I want to do 2 times the overhang because that overhang is for each side. So let's see, this is going to be my top, 2 times the top length overhang. Oops, I had my caps lock key on. 2 times top length overhang. Okay, and then press tab, and this is going to be our base width plus 2 times the other overhang. So if I just type in OH, I'll see everything that has an OH in it. So this is going to be my top length overhang. Did I do that right? I used length both times. Let me do a top. I think that's right. The other one I'm going to change. So I'm going to tab down here, and I want to use my top width. Top width overhang. Okay, that's correct. I want more of an overhang in this dimension than that one. Okay. And then finish sketch. So basically, as long as I start this rectangle right in the middle, I don't have to do any offsetting. I can just say, okay, I know my base width and depth, and I can add the overhang to it. So now, remember we started this sketch on the top of the legs, so I'm going to do an extrude, click on the surface, and pull up, and this is going to be our top depth, which is 1 inch. And there's our top. So let's go up to the top level, turn off selection. I'm also going to turn off my origin here, and you can see that we've got what we were shooting for in the first part of this series. In the second part, we will add all the joinery. These rails are actually going to drop down once we do the half laps on them. We're going to have through tenons on these arches. Oh, you know, we're missing our pieces here. I think that's just a matter of I hid them. Here are stretchers. Okay. And we're going to do mortise and tenon joinery with the stretchers as well. And also divide this tabletop up and get breadboards on each side. And then get into the whole parametric deal and see if we can generate 4 different tables from this one drawing.